Good evening. It's 9 o'clock Central Standard Time on a Friday night. This is Joey Buchholz from the Utopian Baseball Universe. Tonight is our Los Angeles Angels night. As you can see, I've got my trucker's hat that I bought last summer, a matching shirt, so that I look good for the camera, which is rare. This is going to be a fun show tonight. My guest was actually the first guest I had on a team preview show. When we kicked off our season February 9th, I had Mark Marinello and David Rubin. We did the Mets, and that was one of my favorite shows because, as you guys know, I could talk Mets all night. So David Rubin's going to be here shortly. We're going to get to the Los Angeles Angels Utopian Baseball Universe roster. We're going to reveal the opening day lineup, look at that starting rotation. David's going to talk about how he became a fan of the Angels and maybe even talk a little bit about the 2021 Major League Baseball Los Angeles Angels. And then, as always, folks, if you're watching, you have any comments or questions, feel free to type them in. I won't see them right away, but at the end of the show, I'll get to those. And so if you have any questions for myself or you have any questions for David, feel free to leave those in there. I want to thank you guys for all being here tonight. With that being said, let's just get started. Let's bring on the star of tonight's show, David Rubin.
Hey, Joey. How you doing, bud?
How you doing, David? I love having you on. David is the first member of the Two Timers Club as it relates to team preview shows.
Don't tell my wife.
Yeah. I should come up with a different name for that, I guess. We've had Rick Lendenberg on a couple times, and now this is David's second time. David's the first person to do two of these shows, so I appreciate it. David, now, obviously, you and I, we're both longtime Mets fans, but tell the folks watching tonight why and how you became an Angels fan.
Sure. Well, if you're a Met fan and you grew up in the 60s like I did, Nolan Ryan was on that team. He wasn't prominent, but he played a key role in the '69 World Series. For me, I had a real attachment to Nolan for two reasons. One, I used to sit with my grandfather and watch the games. He would have his beer on his little table, and I'd sit down in front of the color TV. And Nolan Ryan was called Von Ryan Express, like the movie. He was so wild at that time, you never knew where the ball was going to go. So my grandfather would trick me. I would be sitting watching the TV, and he'd put his hands on my shoulders, and the ball would come in, and it literally went right by the catcher. And my grandfather grabbed me and shifted me aside and said, "Duck, kiddo, he's going to hit you with the ball." And I'm a 4-year-old, so I'm thinking it's going to happen, right? Like it's going to go through the screen. So I loved Nolan Ryan from that day. And as a result of relating to him, my dad got tickets to see Mets against the Giants for my grandfather, myself, and my dad. And who came in that game? Nolan Ryan. So there was definitely a love affair from day one. And obviously, I'm a huge Tom Seaver fan. But Nolan Ryan was my number two. So back in December of 1971, I had collected that was the first year I collected the entire set of Topps baseball cards. So I had everything set to go. And here comes the offseason. I'm excited who are the Mets going to get. And then I find out they trade Nolan Ryan in the famous Jim Fregosi trade. It broke my heart because, as a 7-year-old, almost 8-year-old kid, you don't think of your favorite players being traded, right? That didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Right. So he's an Angel. So I said to my dad, "I love Nolan Ryan." He said, "I know." I said, "Well, the Angels play in the American League and they play the Yankees. Can I root for the Angels?" He said, "Of course." So my dad is such a great dad. He actually took me to see on numerous occasions. We hated the Yankees, but he took me to Yankee Stadium when Nolan Ryan would pitch, and we would be the only two in the whole ballpark practically rooting for Nolan Ryan and the Angels. So that was how my love affair with this guy. Wait, let me see.
There he is.
This guy was born. And, it's easy when you're a Met fan to root for someone else in the American League but the Yankees. I'm not a Yankee hater. Hating is I think it's silly emotion.
Yeah.
But Nolan Ryan was there, and it was the Angels. And of course, as time went on, the Angels started acquiring great players and more great players, mostly hitters. And then they lost Nolan to the Astros. And so that 86 that 86 pennant, which was the greatest. Still, as I said in your last show, that 86 playoffs, I think, was the greatest series of all time. Nolan was amazing. But it was still kind of hard watching the Mets beat Nolan Ryan. I still had a little lump in the back of my throat. So, ironically, in '94, I moved to Southern California, where I am now. And so every year I get to see the Dodgers play the Mets, and I go in my full Met regalia.
Yeah.
But every year I've been here, I've gone to at least 3 Angel games. But in the last 20 years, I'd go to anywhere from 10 to 20 Angel games, especially with Trout. Since Trout's been on the team in 2011, I go anywhere from 10 to 30 games a year. Love watching Trout play. Every 3 years, as you know, the Mets play the Angels because it takes 3 years to cycle through.
Yeah.
Well, every 6 years, the Mets come out here. So in 2008, Willie Randolph got fired in that famous series. I was at all 3 games. 2014, Mets are out here again. Well, unfortunately, COVID and Rob Manfred robbed me of seeing them again out here for 6 years because they were supposed to play out here in 2020. Instead of bringing the schedule from 2020 forward to 2021, he skipped it. So now the Angels won't be out here again for another 6 years. So I look at the same. Yeah, it is a shame. But that being said, the Angels have been part of my life in weird ways all throughout my life. My mom and dad were both school teachers. And there were 2 very famous pitchers on the Angels in the 60s. They were big-time drinking buddies, Dean Chance and Bo Belinsky. Bo Belinsky was a famous womanizer who dated a lot of Hollywood starlets. And the 2 of them were buddies. Well, in 1971, the Mets get Dean Chance. I remember opening up the cards and asking my dad who this guy was, Dean Chance. He was now in a Met card. He said, "Oh, he's a drunk guy that the Mets got from the Angels, but he's a good pitcher. Hopefully, he'll last with us." My mom said, "Say that name again." I said, "Dean Chance." My mom went into her drawer at home. She had a picture, a signed autograph picture of Bo Belinsky and Dean Chance in Angels uniforms. Why? A kid in her class the year before was a nephew of either Bo or Dean's and had the picture in class and was showing it around. It wasn't show and tell. My mom took it away from the kid and said, "You can have it back tomorrow." Kid never came back to school, found out he was moving. He didn't care about the photo, and my mom had it in her bag of stuff, at the end of the school year, and she brought it home, and now I have this picture of Bo Belinsky and Dean Chance in Angel uniform signed. So the Angels have seemed to follow me. I now, of course, I follow them. So it's been a nice secondary love affair. I don't cheat on my Mets.
Yeah.
I'm not a 2-timer. But since they're in different leagues, I love my Angels. I love going to the ballpark. It's a great ballpark, terrible food. It's a beautiful ballpark. They just haven't done it right with the food side, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me now, because you said you've seen a lot of games since Trout's been there.
Yeah.
How special is Mike Trout? I mean, we don't get to see him a ton because he plays, 3/4 of his games at 9:30 p.m. while we're getting ready for bed. But tell me, is this guy give me some historical context of just how good Mike Trout is?
So, first and foremost, we were young kids once, right? And when we go to a baseball game, we still have that feeling like seeing the grass for the first time. That magical feeling walking into the ballpark never gets old for me, right? I still feel like that 5-year-old, 4-year-old at his first game when I see the grass and I see home plate. So there's a majesty to that, right? And what did every kid want? They want to get the autograph of their favorite player. What first struck me about Mike Trout was in his very first season, he wasn't Mike Trout yet. And he would start signing autographs about an hour and a half before game time. And he went around the entire row of the stands and kids would run down. He would sign for a very long time. Fast forward, he's already won his first MVP. He still does that. Fast forward, he's won 2 MVPs, Rookie of the Year, greatest living player currently in baseball. He continues to do that. It's something that he has not stopped doing. And what I loved about him as a person is he said, "I'm going to do that till I retire because these kids are just like me. I went to the ballpark and I always wanted to be treated nicely. and that's the way his parents raised him. So as a human being, first and foremost, he's amazing. As a baseball player, it's funny. I say this, people think I'm crazy, but he's actually underrated. Why?
He's underrated.
He's underrated. We talk about a player's defensive metrics, first of all. Defensive metrics are terrible. They really don't do a good job of portraying what somebody can do in the field, right? Trout has had a couple of great fielders over the years playing next to him and a couple of lousy fielders. And a couple of the years where he was, his defensive metrics, let's say, weren't as great, he had Mark Trumbo, who was a great hitter, but a lousy fielder playing on one side of him. He's had mediocre to bad fielders on both sides of him at times, and he covers extra ground. He never misjudges a play. He knows where the ball is being hit. He's got amazing instincts, and he's so fast. He's like a gazelle running across that outfield. He's not as smooth as like a Jim Edmonds was, let's say, but he barrels to that ball like a steamroller, gets it every time, always makes the right cutoff throw. His baseball instincts are exceptional. He's got it naturally, and he's intelligent out there. And you can see he's a captain in the outfield the way Torrey Hunter used to do it for both the Twins and the Angels. Mike does that too. That's as a fielder. As a base runner, he never gets caught short. He always takes the extra bag. He's a very heady player. So he's always aware of what's happening, at what the count is, how many outs. Should he push it for an extra base? Should he stop? And he's a team first guy. He will run if a hitter is caught short at the plate and shouldn't have swung and did, and he knows that he's got to continue, running the second base. He's going to get out anyway because he didn't get the jump, or the batter was supposed to take a bunt down third base line and he got a strike instead, and Trout was running and he's caught. You don't see him coming off the field and yelling at that player. He doesn't call his players out in a bad way. He encourages them, and you see that. And then at bat, he's a machine. I'm telling you, if he wanted to hit 55 home runs every year, he could do it. You can't say that about a lot of players, right?
Yeah.
He will go for the double or the single when he needs to drive in that run. His homers are not accidents. These are bombs. And he can do everything with a bat. Well, I mean everything. He can bunt if he needs to. He hasn't done quite a while, but earlier, especially in his career, he could bunt singles, doubles, triples, home runs. He'll hit them all. And he's a beautiful talent to watch in the field. He's graceful in one moment. He's a steamroller in the next. He does whatever it takes. And that bat in his hands, he literally can do anything with it. I would never compare anybody to Willie Mays, because Willie Mays had a grace and a style that I don't think anybody can replicate ever. He was, as much as they're saying Trout the greatest of all time, I don't believe he's the greatest of all time. I believe he's the greatest of right now. And I think when his career is done, because the way his game has evolved, I think he will be one of the 5 to 10 all-time greats. But I'll never insult Willie Mays, who is, to me, the greatest ball player of all time, bar none. But, if I had to pick a second center fielder, Mike Trout.
Trout.
And by the way, I am privileged every night to watch him. It is a luxury that I recognize, that I mean, literally, I'll be done watching a Met game, and right at 7 o'clock when the Met game's over, the Angels start. And I always say to myself, I am so lucky in this day and age. I can watch every Met game on my MLB package, and then I can turn my regular TV on and watch Trout. Literally, I can't imagine a ball fan being more blessed than that.
So one of the things that I usually think about with Mike Trout, because I agree with everything you're saying, I think I don't even think it's close. I think he's the best player currently right now. I think when it's all said and done, he's going to be considered one of the top 5 or 10 of all time. But the problem that Major League Baseball has, I think, in general, is the way they market their stars. And I've been saying this now for 10 years. If LeBron James walks into a mall, and I live 20 miles north of Milwaukee in a very small town, but let's say if LeBron James walks into the nearest McDonald's in the town that I live in, everyone's going to know who LeBron James is.
Like that.
If Tom Brady walks into that same McDonald's, everybody's going to know who Tom Brady is. If Mike Trout walks into that same McDonald's, I think I'm the only person that knows who he is.
Yeah, yeah.
And that has nothing to do with Mike Trout. I think that's the way the game is marketed. In baseball, he plays in the Western Division.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 75% of his games are night games on the West Coast.
Yep.
So your sport's best player and its biggest star is starting his game when 3/4 of America are in bed.
Right.
And in the NBA, it doesn't really matter which team a great player ends up on. Even if you have a guy that plays with the Lakers, they're going to figure out a way to get the Lakers on national television in prime time, Sunday afternoon, Saturday night, displaying those stars. And baseball it seems like they've always failed to market the sport in a way where if your best player isn't recognized by most of America, I think that's an issue.
Well, it doesn't help at all that his team has stunk for the most part the last 8 years. He's been in one playoff game. And if they were a better team, at least you would get a chance to see him in the playoffs, possibly World Series. Look at Tatis, right? He's played a season and a half basically because of COVID, right? And he just signed this crazy contract. Everybody knows him for 3 reasons. 1, his cool dreads. They look great. He pulls it off really well. 2, he's got this exciting, smiling personality like a Lindor type.
Yeah.
But 3, his Padres, in just his second year playing, made it to the playoffs against the Dodgers. So he's already got that visibility that Trout hasn't had on that national stage. And we all know the All-Star game, unfortunately, doesn't mean that much anymore. So the thought of watching Trout for the first time, if it was National League against American League and there was the only time you saw interdivision baseball, it would be a lot more exciting. So that's kind of, the bloom is off that rose. And to your point, baseball does not do a good job and never has in this team game. They've never been able to put that one player forward or haven't done it really well. To Mike Trout's credit, I don't know if you remember when Rob Manfred attacked him because he wanted Trout to be more prominent. And Trout said, that's not who I am. And to Trout's credit, he was not going to try to be somebody that he wasn't. Trout is the guy, as I said, who's going to make sure every kid's got a signed autograph. He's going to make sure every player on his team is hustling. He's that quiet, silent leader. He's the guy that in a battle, he's going to be first and foremost out there. He's going to take the bullet before anybody else does. And when he comes back, he's not going to talk about what he did. He's going to be excited about the friends who saved other friends. That's who he is. So he's not necessarily the right guy to put baseball front and center. But then you have a guy like Lindor, who does have that sparkly, bright, great personality, smiles all the time. So baseball needs to do a better job, number one, I think, of marketing that. And number two, I hate to bring race into it, but the NBA has just done an amazing job of being colorblind in who they market. And baseball, for whatever reason, has never tried to market these incredible players from Latin American countries. They haven't tried to really market some of the African-American ball players. I mean, Curtis Granderson, credible, charitable guy, super brilliant. He was an excellent player during his career. Nobody is more charitable than that guy. And yet baseball did nothing to put him forward, but have him on the MLB network here or there. You can't, if you're not doing something constantly to put that person top of mind, then you're not going to know who he is. And baseball has never gotten that, probably endless amounts of reasons. But you're right, and it was a great comparison because the NBA probably does the best job of any organized sport in getting those players front and center. And yeah, even a person who's just going to see the new Space Jam, right, on HBO is going to see now LeBron James front and center in that. You don't see a baseball player, being front and center in a movie. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Hopefully that changes, in the next couple of years, because Major League Baseball, it can, in a sense of how to market these players, I think it can only get better. David, tell me about, so, the Major League Baseball season kicks off April 1st. You probably have some good insight as to how the Angels are going to do this year. Give us a little preview of how the Angels are going to look on the Major League diamond.
Sure. Well, they made some good, solid pickups, nothing earth-shattering. They got an excellent shortstop, Iglesias, from the Tigers, and they got an excellent closer, Iglesias, no relation, from the Reds. However, the one problem they've had, and this has been forever, going back in the days of Nolan Ryan, they had Ryan and Frank Tanana and nothing else. Go back to even the 2002 World Series team. They had Chuck Finley. They had a couple of decent starters, but they've had a Finley here. They've had, a Mark Langston here, but they've never had that dynamic rotation all at the same time. They've always been known for their great hitters. Well, unfortunately, 2021 is going to be pretty much the same. They've made some solid moves. You can call them under the radar. They got some innings eaters. Cobb from the Orioles, who at one time was a Ray under Madden. They picked up what's his name, Quintana, who was with the Cubs and then the White Sox.
Okay.
Both those guys had severely. How would I best say it? Let's just say they're not who they were even 2 or 3 years ago, right? They were buying on the lower side. Dylan Bundy had an exceptional year last year. He was once a great Orioles prospect. He had a sensational year for them. He's a free agent at the end of this year, and he no longer has that 98-mile-an-hour fastball. He's a control guy. So they don't have that one pitcher with amazing stuff in that rotation beyond Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani has a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. The question is, how many times are we going to see him flash it? Because of his past injury history, he's a two-way player, which I love everything about that. I think it's one of the greatest stories ongoing in baseball. But until he shows us that he can do this for a whole season, it's going to continue to be an enigma that we can't predict. So the Angels have a bullpen that has a lot of interchangeable arms behind Iglesias. They have a rotation that's 500 at best style pitchers. They'll eat some innings, but they have 9 interchangeable pieces. And the only person I could be excited for, they have a kid named Reed Detmers, drafted last year. He's got superb stuff, but he's only had organized baseball last year in the what were they calling it? The camps that they had, while minor league baseball wasn't playing.
Yeah.
So how can you predict what he's going to do with the major leagues, right? So at worst, he's going to need a half season in AAA, right? He could be a surprise, but they haven't addressed that pitching issue. This would be a lot worse if it was 2019, because both the Astros and the A's were so strong. The Astros lost a lot of great players, including George Springer, and we know about their injuries. Verlander's out. They've had a lot of problems. I'm not going to even make any references to banging cans. The A's lost a number of players, although they made some great recovery in the last 2 weeks, bringing Rosenthal and getting Elvis Andres from Texas. So they did a couple interesting fill-ins, but they lost some top-notch players. So neither the Astros or the A's are the playoff juggernaut that they were. So the Angels could conceivably, if they have every pitcher in that rotation and everyone in that bullpen having career years or close to career years, the lineup will take them there because they've got some amazing talent. You've got, obviously, Ohtani if he's the DH. You've got Trout and Rendon in the middle of that order. So every day you're going to get unbelievable production from the 3 and 4 slots. And they're batting Trout third this year. I love Trout in the second hole because it gives him more at-bats. But, as he gets older, they're relying more on his power. So they move him a little bit down in the lineup. I'm okay with it. I'm not going to split hairs on lineup order. Justin Upton's coming back from injury. Great ball player. He was a great ball player. This is his last year in this contract. So he's going to be playing for a new contract. So maybe we get something out of him. He's one of those kids that hit or miss. He's having a career season, then he gets this great contract, and then he kind of so it's hard to tell with him. But they've got two superb rookies who I'm sure you've heard a lot about, Joe Adele and Brandon Marsh. Both of them, ironically, are center fielders. Neither one are going to push Mike Trout out of center field anytime soon, right? So they had Adele up last year to play right field. He was overmatched. He struck out way too much. Great ball player. He is in that like Trout class if they were rating prospects. But remember, you're a prospect until you do it. So until he does it, he's only going to be a prospect. Brandon Marsh, very smooth center fielder, plays great defense, excellent all-around hitter. Those are two potential stars. I just don't know where the Angels are going to play them, and I don't think either one's going to start at the big league club because the Angels pulled Dexter Fowler away from the Cardinals. He had, I think, $18 million due in the last year in his contract, and the Angels made a very good deal. They're only paying $3.5 million of that. Cardinals ate about $15 million. So I think Fowler's still got some stuff in his bat. He can still run. He's still a really good fielder. So it's going to be interesting to see Fowler on one side, a hopefully renewed Justin Upton on the other side, and Trout in the middle. Last and not least, the elephant in the room, of course, is this guy, Mr. Albert Pujols. And the problem with Pujols is, when he was a Cardinal, as you know all too well, Mr. Brewer, he killed everybody. As an Angel, he killed the Angels. He's a once in a 2-decade player. Unfortunately, the decade that he chose to be with the Angels was not the decade we would have wanted. So his contract comes due at the end of this year. So that's $30 million off. Angels stand 15 to 17 million below the cap right now. I'm betting there's two things that could happen. They could still make a play for Jake Odorizzi, which would be very smart because 4 of the 5 Angels arms that are slated for this year's rotation are going to be free agents at the end of this year. So that's kind of scary. And Odorizzi has familiarity with Joe Madden from earlier in his career when he was a Ray.
Nice.
And he's a solid innings guy. The only 2 injuries Odorizzi ever had were not to his own. They were minor injuries. He got hit with a ball, and I think he hurt his thumb or something. So he's a really solid innings eater. It would be a really good deal to bring him on board, I think. The other thing that could happen, their new GM, it was schooled under Alex Anthopoulos in Atlanta. He's a lifetime baseball guy, and his whole family, his dad's an umpire, his brother's in the game. Great family, brilliant guy. I have a feeling that he has asked Artie Moreno to hold some funds in abeyance because you know what's going to happen. May comes, June comes. There's a lot of injuries. Teams going to be out of it. If they're still in it, he's now got some money to pull the trigger on getting one last arm before the trading deadline is over. So here's hoping that they actually do that and they don't wait till 2022 and waste another year of Mike Trout's prime because really that would be a disgrace to baseball and to Trout.
I think baseball in general is a better place if Mike Trout is making the postseason. Yeah. I'm not saying it has to be every year, but I'm just saying, how old is he? 30? 30. Okay. Yeah. Baseball is going to be better off if Mike Trout gets into some postseason games and has some success. I can tell you that right now.
Especially this part of his career.
Yeah. I mean, this is when you want to see it.
Right.
Let's take a look now at how the Utopian Angels are going to look in 2021. Before we get to the
I hope they have a better staff.
It's hard, and I say this every show, putting these rosters together is the hardest thing. And David is here to tell me where I screwed up. But before we get to the roster, let's look at some highlights for their schedule. So the Angels are going to open their season here in Milwaukee, actually. So they open March 26th at Milwaukee. Their home opener is a week from that day, April 2nd. They're home against Detroit. Okay. Then on Memorial Day, they're hosting the Mariners. July 4th, they'll be at Washington. Mm-hmm. Labor Day, at home against Arizona, and then the Angels are going to finish their season at home against San Diego.
Interesting.
So you got some interesting matchups there.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at what Gene Mauch has for his. This is just the starting lineup for opening day. It doesn't mean that this is going to be every night. But leadoff hitter on opening day is going to be Howie Kendrick. Troy Gloss playing third base. Wally Joyner, who was hitting 400 at the end of April last year. Mike Trout playing center field. We've got Tim Salmon in left, Freddie Lynn in right, Andrelton Simmons playing shortstop. We got Bob Boone catching. And for the second straight year, the Angels are going to go with Mr. Nolan Ryan.
My boy.
Opening day. This is interesting because Nolan Ryan actually won his 300th game in the Bigs at County Stadium against the Brewers. And he's going to kick off year 2 in the Utopian Baseball Universe at Miller Park. His first start ever at Miller Park, because last year the Brewers and Angels played in Anaheim because they do a home and home. So we were talking about how the Angels or the Mets come to Anaheim every 6 years, and you were robbed of that. In the Utopian Baseball Universe, the Angels and Mets play each other every year. 3 games at City, 3 games in LA. They alternate. So the same here. The Brewers played in Anaheim last year, late in the season. This year, the Angels opened the season at Milwaukee. That's going to be, considering the amount of Brewers fans we have in this group, that's going to be one of the highlights, I would say, of opening day this year.
Well, I love your 80s Bambi's Bashers, the Brew Crew. That was amazing. Love that team. There's
going to be a lot of those. Yeah. I mean, our Brewers show is next week, so we're going to unveil it that night, but there's going to be a lot of players from that team on the Utopian Brewers. Let's look at the rest of the position players for 2021.
Great.
We've got Mike Napoli, who's going to be Boone's backup at catcher. Buck O'Neill, huge get for the Angels. Bobby Grich, Sean Figgins, David Fletcher, Jim Edmonds, Don Baylor, and the wild card here, Shohei Ohtani. So we were talking before the show, how are they going to use him? He's a baseball player, so he's gonna hit, he's gonna pitch, he's there to win games for the Angels. He's you'll see here in a moment if he cracks the lineup to start the season, the rotation. But Shohei Ohtani is going to be a big factor for the Angels in 2021.
Excellent.
The starting rotation now this is just to start the year. We're going to go Nolan Ryan. Frank Tanana was lights out last year. He was 8th in ERA. He threw a no-hitter in August last year. We've got Mike Witt, Mark Langston, Jared Weaver. And then making the roster in 2021, Jim Abbott and John Lackey. But again, Ohtani will get starts.
Right.
And the bullpen, which you guys probably saw to start the show, I accidentally teased it at the bottom of the screen. So a lot of this information's already been tweeted out, like David Letterman's last show in 2014. Francisco Rodriguez, Raciel Iglesias, Ernesto Frieri, Donnie Moore, Dave LaRoche, Joe Gray, and Scott Shields. This is your 2021 Angels roster. So the question comes up every night, David, where did Uncle Joe screw up?
I don't think you screwed up. You had an embarrassment of riches to choose from, and I think you made some great selections. I would have started with Bobby Grich at second base, by the way, instead of Kendrick, only for one reason. Grich is one of those classically underrated of all-time ball players. Joe Posnanski, one of the greatest authors, and we'll come to his Buck O'Neill in a second, come around to Buck. He every year talks about ball players who were just short of getting the Hall of Fame who deserve it. And Bobby Grich, by metrics, but he and Bill James and Jay Jaffe all agree that Bobby Grich should have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. Unbelievable all-around ball player. I still remember when the Angels signed him, Mets were in the running for him. And I said, let him be an Angel or Met. Let him be an Angel or Met. He was an Angel, and I was really happy. Great ball player. In the bullpen, there's someone from a couple years ago who was an A and an Angel who I love, who I would love to see in there, Houston Street. Great guy, amazing human being, Facebook friends with him, so I'm not as objective as I'd like, but he's an awesome dude, and it was a great pitcher. But I think instead of knocking you, I think you need to be complimented on the fact that you have a really interesting blend, right? You've got a couple guys who were closers, Frankie, right, Iglesias this year, Fieri, and the late Donnie Moore, who I loved. LaRoche, Gray, and Shields are middle relievers. Shields was one of those guys who played a key role on that 2002 World Series team. Great long reliever, and a couple times he came in to save a game, and I saw him pitch 3 innings in a row. Beautiful ball. Can you imagine that, a reliever coming in the 7th inning, staying through the 9th? That used to be commonplace. Doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
So I think a really good choice in the bullpen. The bench, my goodness, Fred Lynn starting in right field, and Mike Trout in center, and Tim Salmon in left means Garrett Anderson is off the team, and it means that Jim Edmonds, who I think was the only center fielder who played the game in defensively anyway, better than Trout that I've ever seen on the bench. Wow. Amazing bench. Great selection.
That's
great selection.
I think that's the fun of it. And by the way, Garrett Anderson was on the team last year. He's still property of this Angels team. We could see him next year. We might see him later this year, the way it turns out. David, you had mentioned Buck O'Neil.
Yes.
Tell some of our younger viewers who might not be as familiar with him about the soul of baseball, Buck O'Neil.
Absolutely. So, first of all, Joey and I are huge baseball book fans. I have over 2,000 of them, and it is that one collectible thing. I won't get them on Kindle. And one of the best books I've ever read, The Soul of the Game, by Joe Posnanski, talking about his buddy Buck O'Neil. Buck O'Neil is one of those bright lights, trying not to tear up, because he was one of the greatest human beings ever to be in the game. This is a man who was excellent in the Negro Leagues. Wasn't a superstar. I mean, let's be fair. He wasn't a superstar in the Negro Leagues. He was an excellent ball player. But what he was an ambassador for black baseball, when black baseball was obviously a segregated sport within a sport. He never allowed the horrible prejudice and the circumstances of what went around him to sour him. Quite the opposite. You know the old saying, take poop and make it take, poop and make it into Shinola. I don't want to say the word, but that's what Buck was. Buck was always the glass half full, always that shining light. And he had an amazing career, because not only did he play in the Negro Leagues, he was a scout for the Chicago Cubs, and he found a kid who was, I think, pretty good, a shortstop. You might have heard him, Chicago Cubs. Ernie Banks, ring a bell, right?
Bell.
One of the for those who don't know, before there was a Derek Jeter, and well after Honus Wagner, the greatest shortstop of the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s, before he became a first baseman and retired, Ernie Banks, Mr. Cub, let's play 2. And it was Buck who discovered him. The great thing about Buck, he was an ambassador for the game. He should have been made a Hall of Famer before he died, because what he brought to baseball, he's one of those shining lights, as I said, who enough great things can't be said about him. Superb human being. Please read Joe Posnanski's book. But I have a personal story. I got to meet Buck at a card show. I have a beautiful signed baseball of him and a couple bobbleheads, and is just such a wonderful human being. And I'm shaking his hand, and I was telling him about my dad, who used to go to Negro League games growing up in New York. He saw them at Polo Grounds, Yankee Stadium, Ebbets Field, and Newark. So he asked me who my dad's favorite player was from the Negro League. I said Monty Irvin. And I said, my dad had unfortunately passed away in 2008. This is a couple years before. And I said, I would absolutely love to be able to call Mr. Irvin and get my dad on the phone at the same time. And Buck went into his like this bag that he had with him, and he took out his old school phone book, and he took out a piece of paper and a pen, and he gave me Monty Irvin's phone number. You could tell him Buck said to call. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get to call him right away. My father passed in '08, but a couple years later, I found the piece of paper and I said, let me give it a shot. And I called Monty Irvin. And I got to speak to Monty Irvin for over an hour. And I told him Buck O'Neill gave me his phone number. He said, "That Buck, that's right." He loved him. He said, "Buck will give my phone number to anybody," But no, we had a great conversation. But even Monty said, if you had to pick a human being to love, Buck O'Neill would be that guy always. And if I had to pick a human being to be the heart and soul of this team, Buck O'Neill.
Buck O'Neill was, for those of you that maybe weren't aware of my process, 8 months before Major League Baseball decided that they were going to integrate the Negro Leagues into the stats, last August, I decided that all of the Hall of Famers, Buck O'Neill and Fleet Walker, would be on rosters this year. And the first person I rostered was Buck O'Neill.
Yeah.
The way it worked last year, Wally Joyner was the only first baseman on that team. And I said, this is going to be a good fit because he's an angel. He's the MVP of Ken Burns' documentary, in my opinion. And so he was the first guy I rostered when I had this idea last year. And
do you remember the nickname, by the way? Excuse me for interrupting. Do you remember the nickname that Satchel Paige used to call him?
I can't think of it right now, but I know I've read Satchel's book a couple times.
Nancy. He always called Buck O'Neill Nancy.
But Satchel was known to not know a lot of his teammates' names. I know I've read that before too.
Yes, he knew Buck's name.
He knew his name.
Yeah. That was a joke between them. Yeah. If you read that book, you'll know.
Speaking, by the way, of you had mentioned Ernie Banks. Pretty sure we're going to hear Ernie Banks' name tomorrow when we do our Cubs show tomorrow. We'll get to that here shortly. But David, we do have a good amount of comments and questions for you if you want to stick around.
Yeah, love to.
All right. So in some of these, I know who it is because they've given permission to use their name. Some of them are anonymous, but I can't agree with this anymore. Great stories, David. David's a great storyteller. I could have David on every night. Here's a question from my best friend, Andy Pfeffer. Does Trout eat at McDonald's? I'm going to guess no.
You would be right. So he likes fast food from what I hear, but the way he handles his diet, he's a fanatic about that. So I don't think you're going to find a McDonald's anytime soon. Here's a great comment that I agree with. Again from Andrew. Angels have a really cool video montage of their history. They play. Yes. But the Calling All Angels by Train. Video great. Train, Totally agree. In fact, a couple times that I've been to the games, I've tried to videotape the whole thing with my camera. The problem is because of the flickering on the scoreboard, it doesn't come out well in the video on your phone. But I will tell you, no matter what else is going on, when I'm at Angel Stadium, I don't care what else is happening, who's with me. When that pops on, I'm just watching it, and I cry every time. Just amazing. I wonder if that's after our show tonight, I'm going to go to YouTube and see if I can find that maybe. It's there. I recommend it so highly for everybody who loves the Angels or love baseball. It's just brilliant. Yeah, great point. Thank you, Andrew, for reminding me about that. And if any of you guys are watching tonight have ever been to Miller Park, there's something there called the Selig Experience, where it's like a 10-minute video of Bud Selig. Makes me cry every time because it goes into the history of the Brewers and how we lost the Braves and then almost lost the Brewers, and that makes me cry every time. Here's a great question for you, David. Compare who would you take, Trout's first decade or Pujols' first decade? Wow. Great question. Great question. Two immortals. Pujols played first base. He started as a third baseman, right? Phenomenal first baseman. Great glove. Really was fantastic. His glove was the first thing to go, I think, from watching him. Yeah. Where he went from being really athletic at first base, he got quite heavy, somewhere around 2012, 2013. So he wasn't that limber soul at first base anymore. Pujols was a 300. For those who don't know, he was a 3 to 330 hitter every year. Knocked in 120, 130, bombed like 30, 40 home runs. I'm not going to denigrate that man's career ever because he's one of, quite frankly, he's one of my 5 favorite non-Met players of all time. Mike Trout is obviously in that 5 too. If I had to choose between them, the only reason I would take Trout over Pujols is because of the position he played. If you look around baseball right now, there is a complete dearth of great center fielders. There's maybe 4 in all of baseball, and they include George Springer in that. And quite frankly, George Springer's never played more than 87 games at center in a single season. So I find it disingenuous to call him a center fielder. There is not another ball player in center field like Mike Trout right now. 20 years ago, you had Edmonds, you had Torrey Hunter, you had a bunch of guys who could play the position really well and were still really good hitters, not Mike Trout level. During Pujols' best seasons, you did have guys like Miguel Cabrera and other really, really, really great hitters. Never called Cabrera a fielder. So I think if you had to choose one based on that all-around game, you'd have to go for Trout. Sorry for the long way around that.
No,
but they really deserve, big props, both of them. 2 superstars.
So Andy's got another comment. Andy's going to be on our show next week. He says, I feel I can steal some of these thoughts for the need of starting pitchers to pitch out of their minds to have a winning season for the Brewers show. Yeah, I agree.
Brewers have a much better young staff, I think, though. They have a lot of really good young pitchers who just haven't come into their own versus a bunch of stopgaps that the Angels have acquired, I think.
Yeah, I think we just need them to all kind of get good at the same time. By the way, maybe the best series in the last 20 years was Scioscia's. So I think he's probably referring to the 0-2 series.
Yeah.
Was great. I was living in Minnesota at the time, and Game 6, there's actually a folk singer named Dan Byrne, who is have you heard of Dan Byrne, David?
Mm-hmm.
He's a Giants fan.
Right.
And he wrote just one of the best folk songs of all time called 5-0 Lead, about the Giants blowing that 5-0 lead in Game 6. And I consider that Game 6 one of the top 10 greatest games of all time in 2002.
Phenomenal game.
Unbelievable.
I'll tell you, that series is very interesting. So Giants were my dad's boyhood team. And, of course, I'm an Angel fan. The start of that year, my dad happened to be in Las Vegas. For no other reason that the Angels were 200-1 team, he bet $250 on the Angels. He won. So, needless to say, for my dad, if you asked him what the best World Series of all time, he'll say the 2002 World Series because he won thousands of dollars on the Angels.
It was just a great series.
Yeah.
We got another comment here. Fowler can play outfield, but as Lou Brown would say, he might run like Hayes, but he hits like shit.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think he hits like shit, but yeah, I agree. He's primarily a defender at this point in his career. But, if you watch some of the guys who were fielding next to Trout over the years, he's an upgrade still. So I'll take him for now.
Andy is asking, is Utopian Fred Lynn prime Fred Lynn? That's a sneaky good player. Yeah, everyone is in their prime here. We're not going to have, the Paul Molitor that missed 500 games in the 80s. Everyone's at their prime here, but great question.
I'll tell you that Fred Lynn, talk about a guy peaking at the start of his career. The first 3 years, 75 through 78, 77, were unbelievable. I still think if Jim Rice is in the Hall of Fame, I think Freddie Lynn was a much better ball player all around, much better fielder. Didn't DH for the length of time that Jim Rice did. And if you look at the top 10 years of his career, Freddie Lynn was an unbelievable all-around ball player. He just unfortunately didn't have the legs, like an Andrew Jones didn't have the legs.
Sure. Andy says, great story about Irvin. Agreed. If O'Neill is the Burns MVP, Bill Lee is honorable mention. Bill Lee is fantastic in that.
Yeah.
Bill. I mean, that is such a well done documentary. I can name 30 guys that were great in there. Roger Angel's my all time favorite author, and
for good reason.
I listen to Roger Angel read the phone book.
Thing on Bill Lee, another guy who's an author, of 4 unbelievably great books. He has a very good recollection. They called him Spaceman for good reason. Crazy dude. His books are sensational. Dick Hayhurst has been, a middling pitcher with the Blue Jays and Rays. Terrible pitcher. Wrote some really good bullpen diaries and some other good books, but not even on the level as Bill Lee. Bill Lee's stuff, his books were just great. I definitely recommend them if you like Bill Lee, Andrew. Really, I think you'll enjoy them.
Final comment here is tomorrow's guest. Tomorrow we're doing a Cubs show at 7 o'clock. Geeker Cruisin' says, late but here, what did I miss? Well, Geeker, you can watch the show right now if you want. And actually, we'll be uploading this to YouTube in the next hour or so. I want to thank David Rubin again for just an amazing show. I mean, I'm gonna make it official right now that if anything ever happens to me, this is David Rubin's, because the best story.
Nothing's gonna happen to you, my friend. Please.
Look, we all choke on chicken wings, and things happen. But I'm saying, I love having David on the show, and we're gonna have him on a ton this year. If anything fun happens with the Angels or the Mets. But so again, thanks, David. I love the story.
My pleasure. Hey, just to say one thing.
Yeah.
Fergie Jenkins better be leading that Cub rotation tomorrow night. You're going to get some nasty emails from me.
Tune in at 7 o'clock.
I will.
And speaking of tomorrow, at 7 o'clock tomorrow, Geeker Cruisin' and I, it's going to be a really fun show because I grew up loving the Cubs. I still have a soft spot for Cub baseball, Wrigley Field. So that's going to be a really fun show. You guys are going to have a chance to vote on the number 5 starter for the Cubs this year, just like you did with the Marlins and with the Indians closer. So really looking forward to tomorrow. Sunday night, Cardinals theme show at 8 o'clock with Matt Sadoff. Nice. And then Monday we kick off, essentially is going to be the last full week of team preview shows with a really good friend of mine, Mitch Nellis. We're going to be talking Boston Red Sox that night. So awesome. Thanks again, David. Tomorrow.
Hey, quick question for you.
Yeah.
Wrigley Field, Miller Park. So in Milwaukee, you've got one of the greatest, probably 3 or 4 ballparks in baseball, up there with the Giants, PNC, right? So those 3 ballparks, probably the best new ballparks. You've got Wrigley Field, which is the classic ballpark along with Fenway. You can only forget about the teams. You can only see a game at one of those 2 ballparks. Who does Joey pick?
So this is how I'm going to answer it. And if this is a cop-out, then I apologize. I live in the Milwaukee area, and I love visiting New York, right? So when I visit New York, I love it, but I love coming back because I couldn't live there. It's just too big. It's just too much for me to live there. So the way I'd answer that question is, if I only had one game, I'd have to choose Wrigley Field. But if you gave me the option of season tickets, I would choose Miller Park.
Okay.
Because I love going to Wrigley so much, but I've had some really bad experiences at Wrigley.
Right.
Wrigley Field was the only time I've ever had beer thrown at me, and it's because I was wearing a Brewers hat. Mm. So that's not a blanket statement on Cubs fans or Chicago fans. It was one guy that made a bad decision, but I love visiting Wrigley Field, but this is home. My daughter grew up in Miller Park. Her first game was there. I just have more memories here. So like if it's, you have one more game to see ever, I'd probably go to Wrigley, but honestly, like PNC is my favorite park in America, so I'd probably choose that.
PNC is amazing.
I love PNC. So yeah, if it's one game, Wrigley, but if you're offering me like season tickets, I would choose Miller Park. I know exactly where I'm sitting. Dog and a brat and a Pepsi every night. No more of this, 5 sandwiches,
right?
Stuff. But great question. We have so many fun Cub stories to get to tomorrow, and then tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I've got a major announcement regarding the A's. That's all I'm going to say right now. So just tune in at 2 o'clock for a major announcement regarding the Oakland A's. And then right after that, you guys are going to see the entire spring training schedule. Every single team. We didn't do this last year, but I need to do something to get me ready for the regular season. So we're going to have a 16-game spring training where every team is going to play every other team once within their location. So we'll have 16 Arizona teams, 16 Florida teams. They're going to play 15 games against basically a round robin, and then a second game against another team. That schedule is getting released tomorrow between 2 and 3 Central.
Nice.
And then starting Monday the 1st, we'll be having spring training shows, 5 to 10 minutes a night to get you guys some spring training results. Just to, again, get us ready for opening day, which is March 26th.
Excellent.
Great show again. Thank you, David. We're going to have David on, like I said, a lot this year. Check back tomorrow at 2 o'clock to get breaking news on the A's. Find out when your teams will be playing in the spring. And join us tomorrow at 7 o'clock with Geeker Cruisin' and the Cubs team preview show.
Awesome.
Good night, guys.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.